The road into the valley felt both familiar and strange, like stepping back into a memory that had grown dustier with time. Tall evergreens leaned over the winding path, their branches brushing against the sides of my truck as if welcoming me home. I hadn't been back here in years, not since I left for the city chasing careers, deadlines, and a life that never quite felt like my own. But as soon as I caught sight of the creek running alongside the road, sparkling in the sunlight the way it had when I was a kid, I knew I had made the right decision in returning. This valley wasn't just land, it was my family's legacy, a place where my grandfather built the first cabin with his own hands and where summers had been filled with fishing, campfires, and laughter echoing through the hills. The old cabin came into view, its wooden beams weathered but still strong, standing as if it had been waiting patiently for me. I parked in the gravel driveway and climbed out, breathing in the crisp mountain air that carried hints of pine and wildflowers. It should have been a perfect homecoming, but almost immediately, I sensed something was off. A sign at the edge of the property caught my attention, white letters on a green background that read, "Welcome to Pine Ridge Estates HOA Community." My brow furrowed. Pine Ridge Estates? There had never been an HOA here. The valley land had always belonged to my family, untouched by subdivisions and rules. Walking closer to the cabin, I noticed a laminated sheet tacked to the front door. "Notice of violation," it said in bold red letters, followed by a list of complaints. "Unauthorized structure. Landscaping required. Pending fine." My jaw tightened as I ripped the paper down, confusion mixing with irritation. Since when did anyone have authority to fine me for existing on my own land? Looking around, I saw new fences sectioning off areas that used to be open meadows, and even a few posted rules nailed to trees about quiet hours and parking restrictions. It was as though someone had taken this wild, free valley and tried to cage it with regulations. I stood there on the porch steps, clutching the violation notice in my hand, and felt a slow burn rising in my chest. I hadn't even unpacked yet, and already there was trouble. Whoever thought they could lay claim to this valley had no idea what they were up against. This was my family's land, and I wasn't about to let anyone take that away. The first encounter happened sooner than I expected. I had just started unloading a few boxes from the truck when I heard the sharp click of heels on gravel. Turning, I saw a woman marching up the driveway with the kind of posture that screamed authority. At least, authority she had granted herself. She wore oversized sunglasses, a stiff polo shirt embroidered with Pine Ridge HOA, and clutched a clipboard like it was a badge. Even before she opened her mouth, I knew exactly what kind of person she was. "You can't park here," she announced, pointing at my truck as though it were some kind of menace. "This is a violation of community standards. Vehicles must be kept in designated areas, not cluttering up the scenery." I blinked at her, then glanced around at the wide-open land stretching in every direction. My truck wasn't blocking anything, unless she meant the view of the trees. "I'm parked in my own driveway," I said flatly. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she adjusted her sunglasses. "Well, since you're new, I'll explain. This entire valley is part of the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. I'm Karen, the president. All residents must follow our guidelines. That includes paying dues, keeping up landscaping, and maintaining a uniform aesthetic. Those curtains, for example," she gestured toward the cabin windows with her pen, "will need to be changed to approved colors, earth tones only." I stared at her, trying to decide if this was some kind of joke. She wasn't smiling. "Earth tones?" I repeated slowly, as though the words themselves might make more sense if I said them out loud. "Yes," she said crisply. "It's all in the handbook. Oh, and you'll need to remove those wood piles. Fire hazard. We issue fines of $250 per infraction. You'll receive your welcome packet in the mail." I couldn't help it. I laughed. The sound echoed off the trees, startling a pair of birds into flight. Her expression darkened, as if laughter were itself another violation. She tapped her clipboard. "You think this is funny? We run a tight community here, and everyone must comply." I won't tolerate any freeloaders ignoring the rules. For a moment, I just studied her. The way she puffed up her chest, the smug certainty in her voice. It was clear she had bullied her way into control of the neighbors. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was that her so-called rules held no power over me. Not here. Not in this valley. The longer I stayed at the cabin, the more relentless Karen became. At first, I thought maybe she'd get bored once she realized I wasn't going to bend to her nonsense. But instead, she seemed to double down. Every morning, I'd find a fresh notice taped to my door or slipped under my windshield wiper. One day it was a warning about my firewood being stacked unevenly and detracting from community aesthetics. Another day it was a citation for improper lawn care, even though the natural meadow grass had been growing here long before she ever showed up with her clipboard. She even complained about the cabin's porch light, insisting it violated the light pollution clause. It became almost comical, though her smug persistence was starting to grate on me. When I ignored the notices, she escalated. One afternoon, I returned from a hike to find her standing in the driveway with two men she introduced as board members. They folded their arms and nodded as Karen announced that if I didn't start paying fines immediately, she'd have the county take action. I could see in their eyes that they weren't convinced, but they followed her lead like sheep anyway. She handed me an envelope full of forms, each stamped with red ink like she was running her own courthouse out of her living room. The absurdity of it all nearly made me laugh again, but I kept my composure. I simply said, "You might want to be careful about threatening people on land that isn't yours," before brushing past them into the cabin. I caught a flicker of uncertainty on the men's faces, though Karen covered it with more bluster. She raised her voice, shouting about community standards as I closed the door. Later, I overheard whispers from the neighbors at the general store in town. Apparently, everyone knew about Karen's antics, but most were too weary or too intimidated to fight her. She had inserted herself into every decision, demanding dues, holding meetings, and shaming anyone who didn't comply. Some played along just to avoid her wrath. Others quietly hated her but lacked the nerve to resist. I realized then that this was bigger than just a personal squabble. Karen had convinced herself she was queen of the valley, and she thrived on the power no one dared challenge. But unlike the others, I had no intention of bowing to her authority. She didn't know it yet, but the ground she was standing on wasn't hers to claim, and soon she was going to find that out the hard way. It all came to a head one bright afternoon when I was repairing a loose shutter on the cabin. I heard the familiar crunch of gravel under fast, angry footsteps, and sure enough, Karen appeared, her sunglasses glinting and her clipboard clutched like a weapon. This time she wasn't alone. She had dragged along two more board members, and she looked more determined than ever. Her voice carried across the clearing before she was even close. "That's it," she barked. "You've ignored every notice, every warning, every opportunity to comply. I have no choice but to file for your removal. This is a private, organized community, and you cannot just waltz in here and do as you please." I wiped my hands on my jeans, turned slowly, and met her furious gaze. "Removal?" I asked evenly. "Yes," she snapped, shoving a packet of papers toward me. "Here are the documents. I'll be presenting these violations to the county. You'll be forced out, and if you resist, there will be legal consequences." I took the papers, glanced at them, then calmly set them down on the porch railing. Her expression was smug, certain she had finally cornered me. That's when I walked inside and came back with a thick folder of my own. I opened it deliberately, letting the silence stretch until her confidence began to falter. "These," I said, pulling out yellowed but well-kept deeds, "are the original land titles. My grandfather purchased this entire valley decades ago. Every acre, every tree, every creek. It's all ours, passed down legally through the family. This cabin isn't just mine. It sits on land your so-called HOA has no right to touch." For the first time, Karen's face lost its color. She tried to protest, sputtering about community rights and bylaws, but the board members leaned in to look at the documents. I could see their eyes widen as they realized the truth. One of them muttered, "If this is real, then none of this is enforceable." "It's real," I confirmed, my voice steady. "This valley isn't part of any subdivision. Whatever game Karen's been running here ends now." Karen's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. The neighbors who had gathered at a distance whispered among themselves, some even chuckling. The spell she had cast over them was broken in an instant. She wasn't a queen. She wasn't a president. She was just a woman with a clipboard, and her power had vanished the moment the truth came out.